Welcome back, everyone. This is Corey.
And this is Dave.
And this is Scott.
Scott's a little.
God damn it! We're so
tardy today.
We're Pavlovian. I'm waiting. When does he say
it's
praise
disturbing
Satan?
that you're waiting on that.
I'm waiting.
Yeah.
I am. That's my
come
cue.
on, just go, for fuck's sake. We don't have to say it every time, do we? I mean...
Well, we don't have to, but you've been doing it every fucking show leading up to
it's
now.
So overdone. I'm just like, no, I'm kind of done with it now. So... But,
Satan was so 2023.
Praise Steamboat Mickey.
There you go. Praise Steamboat Mickey.
And his cousin Motorboat Mickey.
Motorboat Mickey, Crack Whore Mickey, Little Mickey from across the tracks, Little Mickey who will hike up her skirt. Anyway.
I don't know. You guys want to start over? This has been a very odd beginning here, but...
Let's do that.
Sorry.
Take two. Welcome back, everyone. This is Corey.
And this is Dave.
And this is Scott. Praise Satan, motherfuckers.
Oh, now you're going to do it.
Now I'm going to do it. Let's not talk about that. Then keep going.
We're back again, and doing it is what we do. And Dave, what is it that we do?
What it is we do is that I don't talk about this shit anymore, remember? We have a whole intro where we do this.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
So, I'm sorry. Slightly correction. I do talk about this, but only in my smarmy announcer voice, which you'll hear when we play the intro theme.
All right. Roll tape.
Guten Abend, meine Damen und Herren.
Welcome back to a brand new episode we're calling Ride of the Valkyries. Yeah, you know the drill. We took albums from Rolling Stone's list of the top 500 of all time, and we're going all Kaiser Wilhelm on their asses. We started with 192 albums. Then, we threw them up against the Berlin Wall to see what sticks, and now, only 68 remain. And today, the fat lady's gonna sing for 4 more. So put on your big boy lederhosen, fire up the grill, and suck down some bratwurst, because this year, Oktoberfest is coming early.
Das ist musikalisch Spielereien!
Okay, so we are now into round 2. If you've been with us this whole time, you know that we've been through a lot of these albums once before, and now they're up again. But this time, each album only gets 5 minutes of our precious time.
My time is precious. Yeah.
If you want to hear what we talked about on previous shows, I will tell you in the intro of each round where to find them. And so, we'll move forward with our 5-minute limits. All votes are final, text tag and title not included, and there is some assembly required.
Yeah, okay.
Our first matchup take place in New York. What the fuck? Did I do this or did you do this to me? Oh my god, Caligula's. In Caligula's warehouse. God damn it, I have to read ahead. Okay.
You're welcome.
Our first matchup takes place in New York City, roughly 5 miles apart in 2 different boroughs, but light years in musical distance from one another. Hailing from Queens and the housing development of Queensbridge is the 1994 breakout album from Nas called Illmatic, a mastery and well-crafted lyrics that has earned Nas a title as the second Rakim of rap, and an incredibly innovative album known for its nostalgic sampling from old jazz, soul, and R&B records. Across the East River and into Manhattan, and a little time travel back to 1971, are the Allman Brothers with their live album simply entitled At Filmore East. This was the benchmark and the blueprint for all future live albums to follow, and with the right headphones and chemical assistance, you too could experience this live performance from the comfort of your own beanbag. We discussed both these albums in a previous show called At Filmore Correctional, where we also talked about Johnny Cash's live album At Folsom Prison, and the album Kimono My House by Sparks. And so, we jump back across the East River and we begin with Nas, and the timer starts now.
Nasty Nas with Illmatic. So, Corey, as you mentioned, Nas grew up in Queensbridge, which is not only one of the largest housing projects in the United States. As we mentioned on the other show, folks who live in Queensbridge would say it was extra depressing because you're growing up in this environment of poverty and drugs and violence. And you can see it's right on the water, so you can see right across the river to Manhattan. where the wealthy people live and where they don't have these problems. And so Nas comes around and basically puts this album of just great poetry that really kind of captures the stuff that he's growing up around. And as you said, this was on the show where we talked about, among other things, Kimono My House, and that's actually how we got here. So in round 1, it beat Kimono My House, and now we are here in round 2.
Lyrically, the second time, I was even more impressed. I attest this to all of the other albums we have listened to and endured in the past 2 years since then. I mean, the realism, it's an unapologetic picture of Queensbridge projects. It provides his firsthand knowledge and experience of the realities of inner city life. It is, I think we've used the word before when we talk about Mobb Deep. It's gritty. It's real. There's no holding back. There's a social commentary of just everything we know about everything that's systemic, all our systemic issues that existed then, exists now. His storytelling is amazing.
Yeah.
He walks you through this like you're going down the halls as if you're in Pulp Fiction. Those endless halls.
I think I mentioned last time we talked about it that one review I read, very apt, referred to him as the hip-hop Hemingway, just because of his ability to kind of craft a story and put you in the moment.
Yes. Like I said, the timelessness, everything he talks about are still relevant to this day. It was even more impressive the next time around.
Yeah, I agree. And the fact that, and this we've said before too, but it bears repeating, the fact that he did all of this at 19 years old. I mean, when this album came out, he was 20, but he was still 19 when it was being recorded. This is a kid. And his ability to do this is just like light years beyond what somebody who's 19 years old should be able to do.
And he's doing better than what rappers twice his age were doing, or have done since, that are not even, that are twice his age.
Yeah.
Nice, brilliant. Yes, liked it. The gritty realism of it, and like you were saying, Corey, the storytelling aspect. He seemed to have a better grip on rhyme in a lot of more so than a lot of others.
Yes.
So.
Yeah.
It's like he was meticulous with his rhyme. The same thing we said about Rakim.
Yes.
Took the time to make it not just a simple rhyme, but a rhyme that actually works.
Right.
That you wouldn't think would.
Yeah, the other thing that we didn't talk about last time is the album art. We've talked about how album covers are kind of a critical piece of the puzzle, too. It's the packaging counts when you're considering best album. Prior to this point, a lot of hip-hop albums, it was the rapper maybe leaning up against a car with some chains, maybe some guns, maybe some girls, and it was just like this. It was a standard kind of trope almost. Nas takes a picture of himself as like a 8-year-old and superimposes it over a picture of the Queensbridge projects, and it adds this sort of like dark, muted coloring, monochromatic coloring to the whole thing. And it really actually feeds the story, right? Because the whole story is him growing up as a kid and influenced by this environment. And so you see on the album art a picture of him as a kid and completely overshadowed by the projects in the background. Right. It was a very good use of art, especially in hip hop, very different for that time.
It was incredibly different, especially, you're right, from what we saw on other albums or what we had seen, the guys with the guns, the guys with all the cash, and the flamboyant machismo.
To be fair, it's been a minute since I've actually looked at album art, so I had not really considered that perspective. But yeah, I guess you're right. I feel like album art is a dying thing now, especially with the release of singles.
Well, I feel like it's coming back, and I'll tell you why. Because, and we've talked about before, I use Apple Music. People have their own streaming services. Apple Music, at least, has recently kind of come to this realization that people not only want to see album art, so if you're watching it on your TV, they put it on the screen. If you're in your car, they put it on the screen. Finally, somebody realized, wait, holy shit, this is a digital era. Album art doesn't have to be static. And so they have come up with the idea of actually animated album art. So not only is there a cover image, but the cover image actually animates while you're listening to the song.
Wow.
Huh, interesting.
That'd be cool.
But that's sort of a way, I think, pulling people back into those visuals that I think you're right. We're kind of on the decline for a while.
Yeah. It just felt like, everything is a fucking EP now. Everything, artists just do singles. And I get it, It's hard to tell a whole story anymore and have it mean anything as a piece, unless you're fucking Taylor Swift.
And interestingly, that's going to come up again today.
Yeah.
I think even for singles, though, you're starting to see artists like focus on the album art. They'll do a piece of album art just for the single itself.
True. See a lot of that.
All right, we are over our time, but we did change the subject.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Ding, 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 Billy.
We went down one of our own side
He
trails.
wants to ding, ding, ding you with his ding, ding, ding.
All right.
Ding, ding.
Ding.
Ring, ding, ding. I hate that so much.
Let's go to Filmore East, 1971, Allman Brothers.
Tied to the whippy post.
And it beat out another live album of Johnny Cash's live at Folsom
I wish
Prison.
it hadn't. I'll be honest here. I like Folsom Prison much more than Fillmore East, but that's just me.
So the backstory on this album, real quick, is there had, the Allman Brothers had been in a string of failed bands, one after another. Actually, this one kind of looked like it was trending in the same direction. What changed for them was they really got their handle around live performing, and their live shows started drawing these huge following, and to the point where the idea of doing a live album was just like a no-brainer. So they did it at the Fillmore, and it really, Corey, as you said earlier, this really kind of set the template for live albums going forward because it was so well done.
We've complained about other albums where, they've noodled for too long, or there's drum solos, and these were really meant for live shows. But back then, there was no YouTube. There was no video cassettes. There was no way to actually experience these shows. These albums were the closest thing to it. Even if we think now in 2023, some of these long-ass solos or these jams that go on forever are just monotonous, back then, that was the shit because you were getting the experience that you were missing out on by not being able to go to the show because it didn't come to your town.
Yeah, plus...
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, too, the artists talk about noodling, Corey, and it's like, you went to the show to see that because, nowadays, the artist is like, they can put up 8 shorts and monetize them of them doing their noodling, whereas before they had to tour the country and get out live every night and actually noodle in front of a live audience and get something back from it. So no, it was a lot more interactive experience, and I think it was better. But whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even mind most of. I mean, there's a lot of jamming. These guys really had a reputation for on-stage improvisation. And that's fine, but I will tell you that there's stuff there that, frankly, even if I'd been in the room while it was being recorded, I probably wouldn't have been into it. So, for example, on You Don't Love Me, there's this breakdown where all the background instruments drop off, and it's just the guitar guy. He's just noodling around the guitar. I can never remember whether Dwayne was the guitarist or Dwayne was the keyboard player, but one of them was noodling around on the guitar, and it goes on for fucking ever, just essentially a cappella, just the guitar doing nothing, and it's not even good. I mean, he's not even doing anything that impressive. And then finally, like after about 4 or 5 minutes of this, then drums kind of come in and provide a little bit of support, but it's just a little better, but still not great. Then it goes on for another 7 minutes. It was, I mean, I'm a guitar player and I didn't want to hear it. You know what I mean? And
thank you, sir, for saying that.
And then tied to the whipping post, I made a note here. Tied to the whipping post was over a full 5 minutes before it actually ended.
Oh my God!
Like they hit they hit the perfect resolution of that, and then the track went on for another 5 minutes for no reason whatsoever.
That was just so inappropriate. They are fucking cited and fucking charged with inappropriate noodling.
These are, in fairness, like, I'm harping on this, but these are moments in a larger context, and a lot of these jam sessions do actually work very well. These guys were incredibly tight. People talk about how the band was a great ensemble. These guys really knew how to read each other and work together on stage. You had 6 people on stage, which is a lot for a band.
Yeah.
And improvising well.
From a musician's perspective, it's like, wow. Because they went on that goddamn long, and they were able to, like you say, improv, just bing, 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 and they, clearly they were in sync, and that's awesome.
And it was seamless.
Yeah. And the key to that, and you guys know this, the key to that is knowing when to lean in and take the 4,
right,
and also then knowing when to pull back and let somebody else take the 1. And they did that perfectly. I mean, they really had a sense of, okay, now it's Jimo's moment on the percussion, now it's Dwayne's moment.
Right. Very cool album for all that. I mean, for live albums back then, wow. Because, the 70s, what a strange time in music, too.
It really comes down to you had to be there. And I think both the band and the audience being chemically enhanced really helped set the mood.
It doesn't hurt.
There's a woman on the internet, I don't know her real name, she posts under the name Alt Rock Chick. She has a whole website. Did a review of this album, and she picked up the phone and called her dad because her dad was sort of the right generation for this. And she's like, I know I need to listen to this. She's like, but what was the big deal here? What's the pull? And this is a quote from her father while he was talking to her. Live albums were a lot more important back there. You would have never heard of Peter Frampton if it weren't for live albums.
True.
And I went, holy shit, that's true. Like this huge star, Frampton Comes Alive is the only reason anybody really knew who the hell he was.
That's right.
Yeah, and that talk box solo I think only works if you were high at the show.
Dude, yeah, that worked the first time I heard it. After that, it did not work. And it was like, okay, it's a one-trick pony for sure.
The other thing that's worth pointing out about this album is, as good as these guys were, there were zero overdubs.
Yeah.
They were insistent, like, what happens on stage is what goes on the album. That's it. We want to capture the live performance perfectly. So this is incredibly tight, and they fixed nothing in the studio.
Right.
Okay, it is time to vote. And Scott, you are up first.
As much as I appreciate the Allman Brothers' musicality, I'm giving it to Nas because that was just a much better album. Lyrically, melodically, I don't know, just I liked it more. So
I'm next, and yes, I agree with you. Everything, I mean, the Allman Brothers, this is the epitome of what it is to be in a band, to be able to play off one another, to be able to have the physical cues of looking at someone with a nod or a dip of a guitar, and it just all works in sync, and it's amazing. And this goes back to what jazz artists have been doing for forever. But the Nas album is fucking amazing. So my vote still goes to Nas.
Yeah, I don't have to say a lot. You guys said it all. I'm 100% with you. It's Nas.
All right. And in this one, we are in agreement with Rolling Stone.
How about that?
The Allman Brothers ranked in at 105 and Illmatic ranked at 44. All right. Our second round is another musical shenanigans doozy. First, we have a little alternative surfer punk rock and roll band out of Boston. Out on the road trying to make ends meet, playing in bars, sleeping in their cars, and practicing right on the street. And everybody's waiting, getting crazy, anticipating love and music from the band Pixies and their album Doolittle. An album that inspired one Kurt Cobain and Nirvana with its unique blend of genres and crisp production. Taking on Pixies, we crossed the pond this time to Stockholm, Sweden for one Robyn Miriam Carlson, better known as just Robyn, with her pop-infused electronica dance album that approached this genre from a totally different direction and made her own distinct sound. We talked about Pixies and Robyn on a rather popular show called Dinner Theater. That is now our most downloaded show, where we also discussed the Big Star album Third / Sister Lover and the album Stand by Sly and the Family Stone. But all cheap plugs aside, we start with that little band out of Boston, Pixies. And the timer starts now.
So this was the follow-up to Surfer Rosa. The big Pixies debut was Surfer Rosa, and God, that album was huge. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't really clear whether they were going to be able to match that. They go back in the studio. They start working on this album. They originally they ended up with the title Doolittle, but Black Francis originally wanted to call it Whore.
Whore.
They went with Doolittle. That alone should make it Scott's favorite album. But
totally my favorite album. Actually, I love these albums.
This is often considered their most accessible work. Yeah. Pixies were weird. We talked about this last time. This is one of sort of the least weird albums that they put together. And we got here in round one because they beat out Sister Lovers by Big Star,
which was Big Star's weakest album. And we talked about this. That was a band that was falling apart at the time.
Yeah.
But one big key thing on this album is the producer, Gil Norton. He brings in a very polished sound, but yet preserves the raw energy and unique qualities of the band. You've got this surfer punk and all this other noise going on, but it's so well done. And this is someone that then worked later with the Foo Fighters on their album The Color and the Shape. So
right.
You know songs like Monkey Wrench and Everlong.
Right.
Gil Norton.
Yep.
He worked with Jimmy Eats World.
Ah.
Pixies here, he kept kind of that sloppiness of punk, but he chose not to go the easy lo-fi route and made this crisp and made it to where you still get the intensity of punk, but you get it clean. And this is how albums should be produced.
Fair.
Yeah, I agree.
I think our early Pixies leads into, early Green Day too, and without Pixies, maybe Green Day didn't happen. I don't know.
Yeah, I think Billy Joe Armstrong has said as much. I mean, he's talked about his influences, and I think Pixies is one of the ones he quotes, or he cites rather.
Obvious influence there. I mean, come on. Yeah, their sound was just so smooth and had that cool little punky edge that made you go, hey, it's almost pop, but it's not. Cool. Yeah.
They're dissonant sounds.
Yes.
They're unconventional structures of songs.
I love that shit.
It worked. Yeah. It just worked.
Honestly, one of Black Francis's great strength was seemingly not having an editor, an internal editor. He sort of has this stream of consciousness, like if he wanted to go to a different chord and it was a weird place to do it, fuck it, he just did it. If he wanted to like sing a line a little differently, fuck it, he just did it. Or phrase things differently. It was almost just like whatever popped into his head, he did, and he didn't have that little voice that was like screening things out before they came out.
It's hard to break your own filters. I try, but
yeah.
Damn. Even
that's what I'm here for.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, you're the external editor. It's fun that way. It's like, what can we squeeze by this time? I don't know. Let's try. We don't really try.
The other thing that I think you get, and maybe this is attributable to what I just said about not having that internal editor, is I noticed this listening to this again to prep for this show. I noticed there's a lot of musical range here. Like every single one of these songs has its own unique sound. They're not one of these bands where you just get same, right? It's every song sounds like a different approach than the last one.
There's a couple of weak points on the album, but overall, what do you expect? Not everyone's going to bat 1,000.
And it's hard to write a perfect album.
Yes, yeah, agreed. Agreed.
That doesn't happen very often.
There's some fluff here,
sure.
but not much. The other thing I noticed listening to this again is, goddamn, Kim Deal was so good.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I actually wrote down in my notes that like Frank Black did not deserve her. Like he did not appreciate her. He did not deserve her. Her bass lines are great. When she does backup vocals, she's adding like just the right thing at just the right moment. I really wish he would have let her run loose a little bit more than he did, rather than trying to sort of beat her into submission.
Agreed.
I actually think that, after Pixies, she left and started with her twin sister, the Deal Girls started a band called The Breeders. And I actually think the Breeders in some ways are better than the Pixies.
I like the Breeders.
I would agree with that.
Kim and Kelly Deal.
All right, and that brings us to the end of our time.
Ding! Bitches.
Ding.
Oh, God, do we have to talk about this next thing?
Let's talk about Robyn.
No.
This is dance electronica, and it's different from what most things you do hear out there, and
trash.
I will give her that. I like the marketing of using kind of the mini album, and even though she says mini albums, it's still 33 minutes.
Of garbage.
And a lot of the albums from the 70s that were on vinyl were 36 to 40 minutes. So even though she's calling it a mini album, it's really not, unless everyone has to produce something that's an hour now, which is ridiculous, because you couldn't fit that on a CD.
How did this beat Sly and the Family Stone? What the fuck? Wow.
Yeah, well, yeah. As what Scott's alluding to is in round one. That's how we got here. This went up against Sly and the Family Stone Stand, and this prevailed. I couldn't begin to tell you what the conversation was about, but that's how we ended up. But the mini album. Let's start there, Corey. So the mini album thing. This is 2010. We're like post illegal Napster, right? Where people are sharing stuff online, but not in a way that's necessarily legal under copyright laws. We've now hit a point where streaming music is a viable thing, but hasn't really taken off yet. And so Robyn is sort of one of the first people to recognize this and says, you know what? I don't have to put out an entire 40-minute album at a time. I can put out little dribs and drabs here and there, and then take the best pieces and compile into an album. And that's really the approach she took. And so she's really credited with, and this album is really credited with kind of the launching the significance of streaming as a production tool almost.
Going back to what Scott was just saying in the last round, yes, we have moved away from the album. We are moving back into singles. And in some cases, that's not really a bad thing. If these people can only produce one good song and a whole bunch of shit, then you know what? Let them just produce one good song.
Yeah, how many times do I have to see, new single featuring so-and-so, and new single featuring with featuring. It's like, oh my God, just...
there's a little bit of that here, right? Because Snoop shows up on one of these tracks.
Yes.
You Should Know Better is the one Snoop's on.
Again,
it's a good song.
I just hate this album. I did not like listening to it. I'm actually a little angry with you for making me listen to this again, because it's just like, God! It was just, ugh.
I almost want to vote for it, just based on that purpose alone.
She is a good songwriter. I will grant her that. She does have away with words.
Yeah, I said this is Taylor Swift if Taylor Swift was a better writer. Because we talked when we talked about Taylor Swift, we noted that like she usually gets it half right. Like either it's really solid musically and lyrically it's stupid, or vice versa. This one, Robyn did a pretty good job of pulling both of those halves together and coming up with pretty good music along with pretty good lyrics.
Yeah, if you say so. And music is subjective, kids. Just remember that, okay? And I had to listen to this bullshit. And these guys listened to it, and they were like, "Oh, this is great!" And oh, wow. Just like, what the fuck?
I think we need to make this point too. I should clarify what I mean by really good lyrics. So one of the things this album gets credited for is this is poppy dance music, but it is lyrically, it is very introspective. She draws on a lot of her personal life. She draws on a lot of themes like the music industry trying to keep women down and control women. Lyrically, it is way, way deeper than most pop and dance music ever gets.
Fair.
I'll give that. I mean, I wrote down, what was it? She wrote, I took you to an intimate restaurant, then to a suggestive movie. There's nothing left to talk about unless it's horizontally.
That's very deep, Corey. Very deep. That's what she said, Billy.
Now, granted, it's pop and dance music. Like at the end of the day, this is still pop and dance music. It's good, but musically, there's not a lot it's terribly interesting.
It's like bubble gum for your anus. I mean,
I don't
even want to go there. I don't, all I could think about was, I think it was a Far Side or a comic one time where a dog had like a big bubble coming out of his ass, and then someone went, "Hey, the dog get the bubble gum again?"
They're not skid marks, they're fruit stripes.
Yes.
Oh, fruit stripe gum, yes.
Oh, God. Okay, so
on that note, we must be out of town in time at this point.
We are now. It is now the end of time right now. Okay, so Dave, you get to vote first.
Yeah, it's as tempting as it is to force Scott to listen to this again. It's Pixies. Pixies is just way more musically interesting, and at the end of the day, so.
All right, Scott, you're next.
I was very glad to hear that because, I mean, really, just if I had to listen to one of these again, it would definitely be Pixies, and just Pixies just beats out Robyn just because Robyn was shit, and this Pixies is much more brilliant compared. In fact. Yeah, whatever. So Pixies.
All right, it's my vote. I guess it really doesn't count, but, even though I just dropped you the lyrics from Olivia Newton-John.
I missed that cue, didn't I?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah,
typical.
It's all right. But my vote's Pixies. Yeah, Dave, I had told him I was going to say that I want him to start doing his screaming, singing of physical, I want to get physical.
Right, that.
Baby, let's get physical. Nope. The moment's gone.
The moment has passed.
Billy, did I miss it?
We missed it. You did.
God damn it.
You did miss it, Billy.
God damn it. You didn't wake me up in time.
And we are once again aligned with Rolling Stone.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, good.
Yes, we are.
Pixies came in at 142, Body Talk by Robyn at 196. So not a huge gap between these records on their chart, but all right. We're still in the right, having the same rough order here.
All right, folks, so for our little centerpiece here, we're going to do something a little different. As we're winding ourselves down and getting into lesser and lesser albums and eliminating others, we want to take a moment to kind of start focusing on the other people behind the scenes that don't always get the notoriety they deserve. And this time around, we want to talk about Phil Spector and what it is he brought to music and where he fits in to the history of rock and roll. And yes, we will also have to discuss the elephant in the room of the murder surrounding his life. But we really just want to focus on what it is he brought to music and where he fits in, especially in the top 500. He's on numerous albums, and we will go into that now. But let's start with a little background on him.
Yeah, so Phil's original name was Harvey Philip Spector. He was born in 1939 in the Bronx. His parents were first-generation Russian-Jewish immigrants. In 1949, his dad commits suicide. His dad was heavily in debt and really, I guess, viewed this as the only way out, so he commits suicide. Basically leaves the entire family impoverished. 1953, a few years later, his mother picks up the kids, moves them out to L.A., She takes a job as a seamstress, and he starts learning music. He starts to play guitar. he puts together a group called the Teddy Bears. And he also, the Teddy Bears are working. He also begins to make friends with a guy by the name of Stan Ross. And Stan Ross starts sort of teaching him the basics about music production. By 58, the Teddy Bears record a song that does pretty well, called Don't Worry My Little Pet. They sign a deal for 2 to 3 singles with Era Records. They go on to record a song that was actually, the title is taken from Spector's father's tombstone. To know him is to love him. They record that. You may have heard of that one because it reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100, sells over 1 million copies. They then go on to sign with Imperial Records, and they do a few more recordings, but nothing really takes off, and the group finally breaks up. But here's where the story really picks up, because this is when Spector moves on to record producing, which he was far more successful.
Yeah, he learned early because he was learning from working at Gold Star Records. He was learning pretty much what we've discussed before, the publishing rights, the music rights, and how all of that works. And Phil, from an early age, went, nope, I'm going to control everything. I am going to own everything. He rarely co-produced. We'll get to that because there was only like a few people in the world he would actually co-produce with because he didn't have a choice. He was going to build this all himself. He was going to go out. He was going to find the talent. He was going to bring them in. He found the likes of Ronnie Spector, which then we had the Ronettes. He found Darlene Love. She sang an early song with him. His music originally was a lot of female vocal. That was his strong point. And then one of his biggest hits ever is You've Lost That Love and Feeling by the Righteous Brothers.
The Righteous Brothers.
And that one has a lot of controversy behind it because it's mostly Bill Medley that's singing that song, and they came in as a duo. And Phil just said, no, it's mostly going to be Bill Medley. And when he took that out to DJs, because let's be honest, Phil Spector did slip a lot of money to a lot of DJs because that's how it got done in the day. Anyone that heard that song went, we got to play this song. We love this song. And I think to date, it is still one of the biggest songs of all time that has been played and covered and used all over the place.
Yeah, and Corey, you just alluded to something where he just kind of made the decision that Bill Medley was, despite the fact that they were a duo with kind of shared responsibilities, he made the decision that Bill Medley was really going to be the main voice of the Righteous Brothers. You also talked about these girl groups that he signed. It was not uncommon for him to go out and sign these girl groups and then just decide, nope, you're out, we're bringing in a new singer. That would obviously upset the person who got kicked out, but it would also upset the person's manager. Yeah. Because that manager now is no longer getting a share of those profits. As I understand that there was more than one occasion where those angry managers would actually send like goons to just go rough him up because they get pissed off about this. And that's because of that. That's when he started very young in his career carrying a gun everywhere. And remember that, kids, because that is going to become relevant later.
Yeah, there was a time where he had different acts out on the road. And I don't think it was the Ronettes. I think it was somebody else. They were on the road. And suddenly, they put out a new single. They had no idea. Phil brought in other singers, other players. They produced and put out the song. Nope.
Are you shitting me? I didn't know this story.
He did this because he owned their name. He could put in anybody in that room to sing their songs. And next thing you know, these girls are on the road going, wait, we've got a hit song? Wait, they say it's us? Oh, yeah, you got to learn this song now.
Wow. I guess sound check's going to be hard. Sound check? What are you talking about?
No. So that leads us into the biggest thing Phil Spector is known for is the wall of sound. This was his production madness. Now, a little bit of background here. Phil Spector was a huge classical record fan, or had a whole bunch of classical records, was a big fan of classical music. His favorite was Richard Wagner. If you've ever listened to a Wagnerian opera or just any of the musical parts, not necessarily the singing, they are bombastic and they are over the top and they are thundering and pounding, and just it's an frontal assault of music. And that
Ride of the Valkyries.
Perfect example. He brought that feel to rock and roll, or to what he was producing. He wanted to have the biggest sound. And I think he was one of the first people, oh no, it couldn't have been him, that would do the car radio test. You couldn't really do it then.
Oh,
well,
really?
no, because we didn't have the cassettes or any way to play anything in a car. But he did have, he would actually have like a phonograph in his car. Because when he would cut something, he would record it, he would take it home that night and play it over and over and over again. Now, going back to the Wall of Sound, when this started, when he worked at Gold Star Studios, there were stories of all the musicians would say get there at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon, along with Phil, and Phil would spend 5 to 8 hours setting up microphones and getting levels. Ridiculous. Going out, moving things an inch, moving it 2 inches. It's like being married and go, no, can you move the couch to the left? No, maybe move it back to the right. No. Okay, move it back 2 inches to the left. I mean, just ridiculous. There were musicians that were getting paid by the hour, and by the end of the sessions, they were sometimes getting paid time and a half or double time because of how much time Phil took.
Having a whole day would never even play in a note because you're waiting for him to get the microphones where he wants them.
Crazy.
The other thing about the Wall of Sound, it just was the numerous amounts of players he had. You would have 5 guitar players sitting there strumming single quarter notes, just blom, blom, blom. And he would make them do that. Even some of the best guitar players you've probably heard of, he forced them to do that, play the most simple shit over and over again to create that whole wall. There were engineers playing guitar that they were like, okay, put your fingers here. Yeah, that's how you make a G chord. Okay, just strum that.
Well, and then he would double track them and triple track. So not only is he starting with like 5 different guitar players playing the same thing, but then he has them recorded a second time and a third time and a fourth time and layering it on top. So now 5 guitar players suddenly sounds like 20 guitar players.
And sometimes not all the guitars were tuned the same, but that was part of the whole sound. And then Phil was big on bringing in strings, and he just, it's his classical background. But essentially that is the essence of the Wall of Sound. It is just a lot of people, duplicated, triplicated, so many instruments, so many different sounds. We have pet sounds. Brian Wilson was a tremendous fan of Phil Spector. And somewhere in Mick Brown's book, Tearing Down the Wall of Sound, it was hypothesized, or someone said it, that P.S. Pet Sounds was an homage to Phil Spector.
Maybe so, but God, what an album. Ugh.
The thing about this Wall of Sound effect that I would mention too is the finished product would almost always sound great. Remember we talked about Asia by Steely Dan, where they would bring in folks into the studio, and it was such a clean recording you can pick out every individual instrument. The thing with the Wall of Sound is you know you're hearing music, you're hearing notes, you're hearing chords, you're hearing a melody. You can't pick out any one instrument. There's so much going on that it literally is like, it's like, I know somebody's playing something, but I'm not even really sure what I'm hearing right now.
Well, I think maybe with the earlier recordings, nowadays with digital stuff, you can get pretty near to perfect that way, I think.
Well, I mean, you mentioned Pet Sounds. I remember when we talked about Pet Sounds, I said, one of the fun games to play with that album is put on a pair of headphones and see what instruments you can pick out, because there's like bicycle horns in there, there's accordions in there, there's all sorts of weird shit in there.
And then the direct line from there goes to Lindsey Buckingham. And when I read the book about the making of Tusk, he was taping down microphones on tile floors in bathrooms and going 20, 30 feet away and spending hours getting the right sounds and levels. So
Tori Amos, in recording Little Earthquakes, took an old piano and wrapped random keys in tinfoil and just to get weird sounds on like some of the songs. It was just so.
Yeah, so a lot of the experimentation and a lot of different things that were done in the studio, I think we can always point back
Yeah, Phil did it first.
I guess that leads us up to, and somebody else take this now. Now he gets introduced and works with the Beatles.
Lennon hires him to produce the single Instant Karma and is so impressed with the outcome that he then says, hey, you need to come to England.
Hey, Phil.
Because the Beatles had put together, they had gone through these Let It Be sessions. The band had broken up by this point. All they had was a lot of recordings that weren't anything. They hand over all the tapes to him and say, we'd like to do a final album here. Can you take all this stuff and just put it together into something that is usable? So he goes to work and he does his usual tricks of like rearranging things, editing the sounds of songs. The album comes out. It comes out, like I said, shortly after the Beatles had already broken up. It becomes #1 hit in both the US and UK, #1 single with The Long and Winding Road. But boy, did it piss off Paul McCartney. Because what Spector did was he took The Long and Winding Road and completely reworked it in a way that McCartney felt like it lost what he originally intended when he wrote the thing. Lennon turned around, though, and came to his defense. The actual quote from Lennon, he was given the shittiest load of badly recorded shit with a lousy feeling towards it ever, and he made something out of it. He did a good job. But that became sort of like a sticking point between the two of them for a long time, was the production on the Let It Be album. Of course, at this point, like I said, the Beatles are broken up. Now Spector has this relationship, and he goes on to produce All Things Must Pass from George Harrison's first solo album, which we've talked about. Oh, yeah. He adds a lot of strings and symphonic sound to that.
Oh, he did that one?
Yeah.
For a brief period of time, they actually make him the head of A&R at Apple Records. He produces the Imagine album from John Lennon, which we've talked about on the show. And also the one everybody hears every year, Happy Christmas, War is Over. So this is Christmas. That's also Phil Spector.
Wow.
And then things start to take a little bit of a turn. So in 1973, Lennon brings Phil Spector into the studio to work on an album of covers. There's a lot of drugs involved. There's a lot of chaos involved. At one point, that gun comes out. At a certain point, there was an argument in the studio. Spector pulls the gun out, waves it about, and reportedly fires a shot sort of into the ceiling while Lennon was still recording in the studio. And that was kind of the end of the John Lennon relationship at that point.
Yeah, they had a very chaotic relationship.
Go figure.
What was mentioned is Phil Spector knew that when he couldn't get through to John, he knew he just had to put his ideas through Yoko. And then Yoko would warm it up to John, and John would be like, okay, I'll do this. Spector and Lennon were really good friends. But yeah, the gun stuff even made Lennon nervous, which, seeing how that all turned out, it's like, well, he wasn't wrong to be nervous. And the last I knew, Phil Spector did have one of John Lennon's guitars at his home, but I'm sure that's been pawned off or sold it somewhere by now.
I'm sure. The estates, I mean, Spector's dead. I'm sure the estate's sale, if nothing else.
Yeah, I'm sure there was a lot of stuff that sold for tons. So then, okay, so now we move into Spector's darker years. Go on.
Yeah, so Lennon fires him. The following year, Spector is in a car crash in Hollywood. He goes through the windshield. Frankly, everybody who gets to the scene at first thinks he's dead until one police officer notices a faint pulse and says, oh my God, this guy is still alive. And they throw him in an ambulance. They get him to UCLA Medical Center. He goes into hours of surgery, 300 stitches to the face, 400 stitches to the head. He kind of largely becomes a recluse at this point. He kind of disappears into his mansion in California. Every once in a while, he comes out and works on something. So in 1977, he does an album with Leonard Cohen called Death of a Ladies' Man. It was a challenging recording session, from what I understand. Completely shut Cohen out of the mixing sessions.
Wow.
When it came out, Cohen's fan base was pissed because Leonard Cohen had this reputation for this kind of like stark acoustic sound. And here is this big radio-friendly wall of sound album that comes out, and it was nothing like what Leonard Cohen had done before. He turns around. He does, a few years later, in 1979, the Ramones, their album, End of the Century. Same thing. Pissed off a lot of fans because it was a very radio-friendly sound, not that sort of raw punk sound that they had developed. But some of their best performing singles. I mean, in fairness, Rock and Roll High School's on that album. Most people know that song.
And there were strings on that album too.
And there were strings on that album, on a Ramones album.
And again, he pulled the gun out, but Dee Dee actually said, "Go ahead, shoot me. I'm already bored with you."
Yeah.
And another point from that Ramones album was, I think they were given like a budget of like $300,000 or $350,000 to make the album.
Wow.
And so the Ramones ahead of time are like, "This is great. We go into the studio, we do this in 1 or 2 takes. We're in, we're out, we're sleeping.
We pocket the difference.
Yeah, it'll be 50,000 K at the most. We'll split the difference." Phil Spector gets involved. They use every last cent.
Spends every penny.
Spent it all.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How on earth can you spend $350K, even in today's economy, on a Ramones album?
That was kind of the point.
What? Yeah, something's very wrong here, kids.
He does the Ramones album, like I said, that was 1979. The 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, he's largely absent at this point. So in 1989, he gets inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Tina Turner, because he had worked with Ike and Tina Turner early in his career. Tina Turner does the induction, and then this is the quote from Rolling Stone's review. "Spector hit the stage bopping madly to the strains of the Ronettes' Be My Baby, flanked by 3 beefy bodyguards who practically elbowed Tina out of the way. He mumbled a few incoherent words about George H.W. Bush and the presidential inauguration, and then his bodyguards carried him away again." Speaking of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, 1994, the Ronettes, like his ex-frickin' wife, the band that he signed, they're getting inducted into the Hall of Fame, and he writes a letter to the nominating committee where he basically says they don't deserve it, and I oppose their nomination. And he said, look, they really had not done enough to merit an induction into the Hall of Fame. They did eventually make it in 2007, but apparently, like in 94, when they were originally up for it, he was one of the voices arguing against it.
And I see that you mentioned the Celine Dion.
Yep.
And how that all came about. Paul Schaefer, Celine Dion was on Letterman, and he had Celine do a cover of River Deep Mountain High that Tina Turner originally had done. He had Celine do it, and he actually called Phil ahead of the show and said, "Hey, I want you to check it out tonight and see what you think," because Paul had arranged it himself and gotten the group and gotten Celine to do it, and that was how that relationship with Celine started. So they wanted to bring Phil Spector in to do Celine's album, but he would be co-producer. He brought all his same bullshit, all his same mania, and it didn't really work out. So I think he got, at the end of it, he has a credit for one song on her album.
Yeah, he was a fucked up guy.
He was a very fucked up guy. So let's get into the darker moments here. So Corey, you mentioned that he was married to Ronnie Bennett from Ronnie and the Ronettes. That was actually his second wife. He was originally married to a woman by the name of Annette Marar. He started an affair with Ronnie while he was married to her. They got so he and Marar ended up getting divorced in '66. 2 years later, he marries Ronnie. They adopt a son named Dante, and then a few years later, they adopt 2 more sons, Louis and Gary.
And Ronnie basically they adopted these kids, and they were pawns in their marriage. Ronnie adopted because she was literally locked in the house.
Yeah.
He never let her out. In that time they were married, she didn't even record anything in the time they were married. He was insanely jealous, overprotective, overbearing, and what's really kind of sad about it is it was something his mother did to him. His mother was overbearing. His mother was overprotective. His mother was she was also insane. And, at one time Phil even jokes. He goes, "Well, in my family, there's my mother, there's my sister, and me. My sister's in an insane asylum, and she's the sane one."
Wow.
Yeah, his sister Shirley.
Yeah, so to your point, Ryan, so Ronnie said that she was kind of held hostage in the house. She actually ended up, according to her memoir, she worked with her mother to actually escape the home. She ended up leaving barefoot in the middle of the night, claiming that she had been held hostage, claiming that she had been psychologically abused. They get to the divorce. She ends up waiving all rights to the kids, all rights to any future recording revenue. And she later would say that she did that because Spector had said that if she didn't, he was going to hire a hitman and have her killed.
Yeah, that's how he operated.
Yeah.
It was always veiled threats with him.
Yeah, so that's Ronnie, and then there's the kids. And then so both Gary and Dante have stated publicly that they were also held captive, that they were also sort of psychologically tortured and sexually molested. They both allege that they would force them to, that Phil would force them to simulate sex with his girlfriend after Ronnie left. Gary, the quote from his memoir, "I was blindfolded and sexually molested. Dad would say, you're going to meet someone and it would be a learning experience." It's a little bit of a rough childhood, to say the least. All right. And here's where the gun really comes back into play. In 2003. Yes. In 2003, there is a 911 call from Spector's driver. He's calling from the mansion, and the first words out of his mouth are, "I think my boss just killed somebody." The police show up. They find a model and actress, Lana Clarkson, just splayed out in a chair. She's covered in blood. There's a gun on the floor beneath her legs. They start asking Spector what happened. He is immediately defiant, insists that she committed suicide. They don't believe him, of course. He's taken into custody and charged. At the trial, the prosecutors bring out all of these women who this pattern over and over again. He held me hostage. He committed sexual abuse. He sexually abused me. He psychologically abused me. And these stories are all similar, but the first trial doesn't go as planned. There's actually a mistrial in 2007. 2008, they try him again. This time he is convicted of second-degree murder. He is sentenced to 19 years to life in prison. Finally, in 2021, so about 13 years later, he actually, while he's still in prison, gets COVID and dies at the age of 81.
And the holding hostage thing happened frequently. He had people come over to his house, and he didn't want the party to end. The doors were locked, and he goes, "I've got dogs loose in the yard. I've got guards that are trained to just shoot anybody on sight unless I tell them not to." He literally kept people hostage in his house until he said the party was over. There's a lot of mania there.
You think? Quite a bit of ego, too.
All that aside, it's hard to differentiate sometimes the man from what he did in music. But his legacy is, of course, what he brought to rock and roll. He brought us the Wrecking Crew.
Yep, the Wall of Sound, the Wrecking Crew, and the influence he had on other artists. I mean, we talked about the Beach Boys already, but Velvet Underground, in the alt-rock world, you have the Cocteau Twins, My Bloody Valentine, Jesus and Mary Chain, all sort of point to him as an influence. And of course, other producers too. Brian Eno, Tony Visconti have basically said, this guy contributed a huge amount to what we learned to do.
After Born to Run came out from Bruce Springsteen, Phil Spector actually told someone, "I think Roy Batan owes me money because they use my technique in the studio with all the musicians."
And something Scott mentioned on the last show, shoegaze. The shoegaze movement in the late 80s and 90s actually owes a hell of a lot to Phil Spector.
So yes, ladies and gentlemen, an insane man, a mad genius.
I actually think that after Spector died, I think Ronnie put out a statement where she actually she said a few nice things about him. I mean, I think the actual quote, I don't have it in front of me, but I think the actual quote was something along the lines of, he was a shitty husband, but he was a genius producer.
Quite honestly, with the murder, I think he was threatening with the gun and it went off. Probably. I don't think he deliberately committed the murder, but he absolutely, it was.
Oh, sure. He killed her. Come on.
No. I think Corey's saying he didn't no intent. Like it was just.
I would agree.
Yeah, I don't think it was the intent. I truly believe it was an accident.
He had always waved the gun, not intentionally shot anyone.
Yeah, well, and I mean he was. I think that's probably what the general consensus is. I mean, he was convicted of second-degree murder, and second-degree murder usually means there wasn't really any advanced thought to it.
Well, that's all we got on Phil Spector for today. We'll do this again with a different producer, engineer, or someone else behind the scenes. Thank you for indulging us. This has been a production of Musical Shenanigans Podcast. And now, round 3. Our third matchup today is another pond-hopping spectacle starting in Sheffield, England and ending in Straight Outta Compton in southern Los Angeles County. Alex Turner and the lads from Arctic Monkeys come out swinging with their 5th album, AM, a turning point in their musical career when the band started to collaborate on their songs and not just leave all the bulk of the work to Alex Turner, creating more diverse songs and pulling from contemporary R&B and hip-hop. Alex Turner described the album as a Dr. Dre beat, but we've given it an Ike Turner bowl cut and sent it galloping across the desert on a Stratocaster. And how apropos that he mentions Dr. Dre, as the Arctic Monkeys are taking on Dr. Dre's The Chronic from 1992, the heart and hip-hop soul of what would become the West Coast sound for many, many years to come, and where we meet the one and only Snoop Dogg. We discussed these albums on a previous show called Technical Difficulties, where we also talked about songs of Leonard Cohen and television's Marquee Moon. Go check it out. Link on the website. But for now, let's go back to old Blighty and Arctic Monkeys, and the timer starts now.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, Scott. You were going to say something.
No, I was going to say insert screeching monkey sound here. No. Right, yeah, just yeah.
Yeah,
whatever.
go. So the Arctic Monkeys, these guys, I mean, we just talked about Robyn sort of leveraging the internet to put music out. Arctic Monkeys, kind of a similar story because they were sort of one of the first bands to leverage their base, to build a base over the internet. They were doing it in a time of MySpace, but still.
The MySpace band.
That explains it.
Yeah, they'd done a number of albums by this point. They were really starting, however, to kind of see sales dropping a little bit. Because they'd hit this point where in 2013 where guitar-driven rock was really sort of increasingly on the outs. Guitar-driven bands were not selling as much generally. They kind of go back in the studio, though, and they sort of figure out a way to retool it. And it comes out, and it's really one of their biggest albums ever. It's still about themes they were writing about when they were younger, about the club scene and going out and all that, but it's now written from the perspective of an older person who's maybe getting a little sick of the whole scene. I personally I know Scott's got his view, but I personally really like the album, and as you said, we got here in round one by beating out the songs of Leonard Cohen.
Yeah,
and I really want to hear what Scott has to say on a second listen, too, because I know Scott was not a huge fan the first time around.
Yeah, well, Scott still didn't like it. And I was already angry from having to listen to Robyn, so listening to this was just like, I felt like you punched me in the balls with this. It was like a nad smack, just like a slap, more like a slap, like somebody, like you took two fingers and just, oh, Jesus, after I recovered, okay, there's
from the two finger slap. Okay, go on.
Yeah, but the guitars, they're here. I again turn down the goddamn delay, boys. You don't need it everywhere. It's like fucking mayonnaise, You don't need it on everything. Jesus Christ, you don't grease your codpiece with that. You use pork grease, for fuck's sake. This album irritates me still, but I was able to listen to it a little better than Robyn, but still, nad slap. I'm like, God damn it, are we done now?
I really like it. In fairness, I'm also guilty of using a little too much delay and reverb myself, so.
Turn that shit down, man, come on. Me too.
I'm gonna say on the second listen, I liked it this time.
Yeah.
Last time I was just kind of ambivalent. This time, it like I said, this is a product of after everything else we've endured and been through, where I can listen to this and go, no, I like this. I'm gonna put this on before I put on like Tame Impala.
Yeah, that's true. Very true.
In talking about contemporary albums that are similar, I did like the layered vocals and the almost sultry singing he has at times. It was, I don't know, it worked. I think a little bit of indie, desert rock, little R&B, some hip hop. It blended well. I did not hate it.
This defines that little era of indie music, I think. At least, that's the only positive thing I'll say about it.
I did put it as a product of its age, with many other acts at that time clamoring for the same sound.
True, very true.
But I feel that they did it better,
I guess.
Well, a lot of other acts started clamoring for that sound after this album came out too, and was huge. I mean, a lot of them were picking up on this when they went after that sound, I think. The other thing I love here is I just think Alex Turner is just he's not a poet, but he's not like a Springsteen where he's using these, fantastic imagery, but he is just very clever and deliberate about like the words that he chooses. He uses some great little turns of phrase. So, like on Arabella, there's this reference to, most people would say, oh, she had me wrapped around her finger. But he uses this phrase, she's got a helter-skelter on her little finger and I ride it endlessly. And if you don't, a helter-skelter is, maybe if people aren't familiar with the UK so much, but it's essentially like a tower. It's like a sliding board where you kind of climb up a central tower and then you come out of the board and the board wraps around in a spiral. So this image of like riding a helter-skelter is just constantly going around her little finger. Like it's just a very clever way to take a phrase that's been used 1,000 times and express it in a totally different manner.
So you get to the bottom, you go back to the top of the slide.
And you stop and you turn. Yep, that's exactly right. That's the Beatles were talking about the exact same thing.
All right, and that brings us to the end of our time. And now let's talk about D's Nuts.
I actually said in my notes, how do you not like an album that has a song called D's Nuts on it?
I have always loved this album. There's just something that just clicks about it. Everything, I can't explain it. I always come back and I always enjoy this. This is what Dre created is called G-Funk, Gangsta Funk, a subgenre that it's characterized by the synthesizers, the deep bass lines, these smooth melodies, and a lot of sampled funk from Funkadelic Parliament and George Clinton.
Yeah.
Right.
One thing about this is an awful lot of hip hop up to this point. I mean, you sort of had like the boom bap where it was mainly just percussion. Then you have more and more hip hop artists bringing in instrumentation and melody and things like that. But you went through this era where it was still basically loops. They would bring in instruments, but the instruments were basically just recording a quick hip hop beat, and then they just play that over and over again and rap over it. I realized when I was listening to this, I'm like, a lot of these are full blown songs. Like you could strip out the rapping and add a melody line and they would work equally well. Because it's not just the same loop over and over again. The song actually goes somewhere.
The Roland TR-808 drum machine it's an iconic. There's actually a documentary about it. It's an old cheesy drum machine, and it became pretty much a trademark of West Coast hip hop and used in many other places. Think of it this way. The TR-808 is to hip hop what the Stratocaster is to rock.
Yeah, that's fair.
But it is, when you start playing the album or watch the movie Stop Making Sense, that little drum beat that starts playing before the Talking Heads begin Psycho Killer, that's a TR-808.
Yeah. We also talked about, back when we were talking about Kanye, remember Kanye, one of the album was 808s and Heartbreak, and this is what he was talking about, was the 808 drum machine.
A lot of love for that little...
It's the little drum line you hear in Sexual Healing by Marvin Gaye, and Trent Reznor used it in Closer on Nine Inch Nails album. It's cheesy, but it's got such an iconic sound, and it's a drum machine that even Phil Collins used.
I think we actually talked about, when we were talking about the Kanye thing, I think I even mentioned that like that the warm, realistic drum sound that it puts out was actually a mistake, because Roland got their hands on a shitload of factory second chips, and there was some sort of defect in the chips that happy accident happened to cause the drums to sound warmer and richer than they should have, as if it had been built as originally spec.
A magnificent mistake.
And you can't get the chips anymore. So if you want that 808 sound, then you want to, now you have to go out on eBay and find an 808, and they increasingly go from, as they break over the years, they're going for more and more money because there's just fewer and fewer of them to go around.
Oh, I bet they go for a penny.
I'm sure someone has figured out how to emulate them.
Probably. By now.
Oh, I think there's samples. I mean, there's like synth samples, but I mean, for people who want that true, authentic, straight from the source sound.
Some people are psychos about their goddamn vinyl. Some people are psycho about their sounds they get from specific machines, especially keyboardists with, like you said, drum machines, shit like that.
Right.
Guitarists with pedals. Oh my god. And Marshall amps. Oh, don't even get me started.
Some things have not aged well, though.
No.
On this album.
Really?
The diss tracks, I even said, oh, look, John Lennon and Paul McCartney were doing it too.
Except with John Lennon and McCartney, everybody in the world knew that relationship was for shit at that point. The problem we've talked about with diss tracks is, unless you're in on the backstory, you don't have a fucking clue what they're talking about.
Yeah. Unless you're familiar with NWA and Eazy-E and everything that went down there. Sure. Yeah, some of these references are just going to go right by you.
Yeah, you're like, huh?
And there's some stuff that just hasn't aged well that was, I mean, probably shouldn't have been considered acceptable in 1992, but definitely isn't considered acceptable at this point. So, like, Snoop's first song, he comes in and throws around the word dyke as an insult. There's a Bitches Ain't the last, I think it's the last track, Bitches Ain't Shit.
Charming title.
Yeah, and the content of the song doesn't get much better, especially when you consider that Dre has publicly admitted to abusing women in the past, physically abusing women in the past.
Ooh, not a good look.
And then also, kind of like we talked about with the Beastie Boys and Paul's Boutique, this was 1992. This album relies heavily on a lot of samples that they weren't paying for or getting permission, because this was right before all of the legalities and everything else just dropped and went, nope, you're not doing that anymore.
Yeah, thank goodness.
All right, we are at the end of our time. Ding. And I vote first.
Go. Tell us.
And it's going to be Dr. Dre and the Chronic for me. Scott?
Thank you. I as much as I disagree with some of the content here, I'd listen to this again way faster than I listen to that Arctic shit.
Okay, Dave.
No, I agree. I mean, I still like the Arctic Monkeys album better than definitely Scott, and maybe Corey has finally come around. But in terms of like long-term impact, I mean, just that, if nothing else, just what the Chronic did for just the sort of direction of hip hop for the next 15 years or so, that alone is enough to put it over the top.
And quite honestly, there's a couple songs from AM I now have in rotation. I like them. Like I said, second time through, I went, you know what? I can agree with this.
It's a good thing that music's subjective, Billy.
Yes.
Some of that trash that I listen to, dear God, no one should be subjected to that shit. Womit Angel comes to mind. Just no one needs to hear Womit Angel. Why do I listen to them? I don't know. Disturbs me. Anyway.
All right, let's move on.
All right, now we're getting, this round is my nuts in the door jam moment. So
yeah. Our final matchup is, well, okay, you get the idea by now. The only thing today's matchups have in common is that they were on the Rolling Stone Top 500 list and could probably be found on CD at one time or another. The first album on our docket in this lopsided pairing is Violator by Depeche Mode, dating back to 1990 and widely lauded in black-lit clubs by people with slightly more makeup than Tammy Faye Baker, collectively, not individually. This was Depeche Mode's 7th outing and hit the big time with Personal Jesus and Enjoy the Silence, which, believe you me, silence was often better. Taking on Depeche Mode are your 4 cranky boomer grandfathers. Well, one of them did finally shut up. I'm talking about David Crosby, Stephen Stills, Graham Nash, and Neil Young with their album Deja Vu from 1970. And this was long before they threw out their hips, and when they were the hip in hippie. We discussed these albums on a show called The Ironic Sessions, along with Elvis Presley's first album and Alanis Morissette's Jagged Little Pill. And now we welcome back more sad British twat music and start with Depeche Mode. And the timer starts now.
Yeah.
My own personal Jesus.
Yeah, so Violator, that is one of the big singles off of this. So Violator was a change in direction for Depeche Mode. They approached it very differently. It used to be that they would kind of get together, decide on what they wanted the album to sound like, they'd make a demo that was pretty much fully finished product and then just kind of tweak around the edges. This album, Dave Gahan takes a very different approach. He asks everybody to come up with a few ideas, do a very, very, very basic demo tape, bring it in, and then everybody sits down in the studio and starts collaborating. What can we add to this? What can we tweak about this? What it ends up being is a very different sound for them, not the least of which because they brought in, it's really a guitar-driven song. For a band that was primarily known as a synth pop band, suddenly the guitars are very forward here. There's more electric guitars, more rock instrumentation than they had used up to the past. We got here, just real quick, in round 1. This beat out the debut of Elvis Presley. Yeah,
the guitar sounds really did give it a larger sonic feel. It wasn't just the synths. The guitar actually added another layer. That was really cool. I mean, I could appreciate it. Talking about a lot of the sound, their producer, Flood, that's his name, Mark, That's who Mark Ellis goes by, Previously to Violator, he was an engineer on the Joshua Tree alongside Brian Eno and Daniel Lanois. And then he produced Erasure's The Circus, and then was a co-producer on Nine Inch Nails' debut Pretty Hate Machine. And this was an album that we discussed on an earlier show, Life, the Universe, and Everything. Go check it out, folks. So Violator, when I'm listening to this now, is almost like the perfect amalgamation of the Erasure and the Nine Inch Nails albums. There's the bouncy synth pop of Erasure and the darkness and driving beats of Nine Inch Nails.
That is such a good observation.
That's a very good observation. It's like, yeah, I see that completely.
And it wasn't until I was reading about Flood of what he worked on previous to this, and now I listen to Violator and I go, okay, so I don't know if this was the band or if this was the producer bringing in his chops and what he had been doing.
There's certainly an influence.
Absolutely.
This album, somebody pointed out to me that this is 1992. It sounds like absolutely nothing else that was coming out in 1992. I mean, love it or hate it, it was different. Because of that guitar forward, read a review where somebody said that this is if you have a friend who was only into guitar driven rock and roll and you were trying to get them into expanding into their horizons and listening to some synth music, this is the gateway drug. Put this album in front of them because there's just enough guitar driven rock to keep them happy, and then cross them over into that synth area. This album did quickly get a reputation for one night hookups in goth clubs, basically.
But I still dig this album because it was, even on second listen, it was like, oh wow, yeah, okay, I liked it. I actually like this one better than any of the others that I listened to. Jesus. Speaking of, it's like each round got me this time. First round was like, oh fuck. Second round, fuck. Third round, fuck. This one, Jesus. So yeah, okay.
I can absolutely appreciate what they accomplished here.
Yeah.
And bringing in the guitars was, yes, it was different than a lot of the other synth stuff we had been listening to prior to that. All right, so do we have anything else to say? Or can we?
I'm good.
Okay. So let's move on to Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young.
Yeah.
Yes.
Deja Vu.
1970. This comes at a moment where each one of them was sort of without a home. David Crosby had been kicked out of the Byrds. Graham Nash had been fired from the Hollies. Stills and Young were previously shared a band with Buffalo Springfield, but Buffalo Springfield broke apart and they had nowhere to go. The challenge they had was they could sing like crazy. Man, the harmonies are fantastic, but they weren't really great instrumentalists, and they also needed some help with songwriting. So they bring in Neil Young, and really the result is arguably the first real great American supergroup. This album, as we said in round one, beat out Jagged Little Pill by Alanis Morissette.
That wasn't very hard.
I do think they're one of their strongest players, other than Neil Young, is Stephen Stills.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
He's a great songwriter.
David Crosby, I've always just been take him or leave him. I mean, he was a great singer. The guy could harmonize brilliantly. Yes.
He has his moments and he has his place. Without any one of them, this would never have worked, I don't think.
Yeah, so actually David Crosby, there was an interview where Crosby gave where he said the greatest strength we had was being as songwriters. And the trick we had was that we had several. Most bands have one, some have two. What that gets you is if you're painting a picture and you have a number of colors on your palette, if you're working with somebody else, they have different colors on their palette. If they have 6 and you have 9, all of a sudden you have, he said 16 colors, but apparently David Crosby couldn't add. If they have 6 and you have 9, then technically you have 15 colors.
And maybe I'm the one help. Yeah.
As I was reading this just now, I realized he did the math wrong. But anyway, the net takeaway was if they have 6 and if they have 9 and you have 6, then you have 15, not 16, David Crosby, and you get a better painting as a result, just because you have more to work with.
Fair.
Yeah. Going back to this, the song 4+20 really stuck out. Incredible song. It's only Stephen Stills playing it because he wanted it for his solo career, but they all heard it and they loved it. No, we need to have this on the album. And he goes, well, you can have this on the album, but nobody else touches this. It's like a standalone. There's not even any harmonies. There's nobody else singing on it. It's just him. I'm like, why'd you put this here? It is a great song. He could have absolutely used it for his own solo career.
Strange.
Now, one of the downsides of the having 4 songwriters is they didn't actually write together very often. Most of this album is like, it's a Graham Nash composition, followed by a Neil Young composition, followed by a Stephen Stills composition. As a result, the final product is a little bit inconsistent and all over the place. I think it would have been really interesting to see what they could have come up with if they'd actually collaborated with one another as opposed to just bringing in their own individual songs. So that's one criticism.
And that's probably why Woodstock is probably one of the strongest songs on here, because it's a cover.
Right. None of them wrote it.
It was a cohesive song. It came in as a cohesive song, so they all just did their parts.
Yeah, that was a Joni Mitchell original. But their version, I think we said that the last time we talked about this, I think their version was actually more popular than Joni's version.
It's a great version. In fact, whoever thought about bringing in the keyboards and the organ sound, it really felt like Woodstock. It wasn't
an organ grinder always makes it more authentic.
Every time. But it wasn't just the song itself about Woodstock, the sound of it. You could imagine the fields and Woodstock with that whole sound, because it really encapsulated the sound. I mean, these guys were that generation.
They were good musicians. They were very good musicians.
Absolutely. Each
but
in their
own. I still
own.
wanted to punch myself after hearing this. I was like, Jesus. And that fucking song about the house.
Oh yeah. We mentioned this last time. Our house is a very, very, very fine house. I'm like, what an awful, awful song. And like, even Graham Nash, who wrote it, said, I do not understand why people like this. Because he literally just sat down at the piano and started improvising is where that came from.
Album filler.
It was probably just words he was using as a filler of like, right. I have this medley, and I'm just going to go, our house, a very, very fine house. Okay, but we'll put some better lyrics on top later. And someone went, no, those are brilliant. Let's keep those. And again, at what point did you think this was a good idea?
There you go. Let's have another bump of Coke.
I told you guys last time, as a kid, the first time I heard that song, they used it as a jingle for Eckrich smoked sausage.
Oh, it's kind of like when you hear about the original version of Yesterday. It was about Paul McCartney eating breakfast, but he was just putting words down to just so he could get the melody in his head and then come back and write lyrics. So I think this time he was just throwing out nonsense words, and then they went, oh, let's keep that. And so that brings us to the end of our time. All right, Dave, you can go first.
God, this is such a lesser of two evils vote. I really don't care for either one of these albums. Boy, I came into this not even knowing how I was going to resolve it either. And as you're hearing, I still don't know how I'm going to resolve it. I think compositionally, I'm more impressed with Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. The writing is a little bit more developed. I mean, we talked last time about how Violator, they would kind of settle into a moment and just repeat the same musical phrase over and over again, whereas Crosby, Stills, Nash actually wrote full-blown songs. Plus, you add in that the complexity. These guys were so good at harmonizing and the complexities that go with that. I think that is another factor that I think sets it apart. So, yeah, CSNY.
Scott?
As much as I felt punched from listening to CSNY musically, put next to Violator, it's like, yeah, come on, obviously it's better. So, yeah, Crosby.
And I'm last a vote, and yeah, it's Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. I think that they look at how much they've influenced and how much these songs of 1970, and here we are some 50 plus years later, and they're still played. You can take away Our House, but Teach the Children and Woodstock, they're solid songs. I think to Dave's point, they probably would have been better had they actually written these songs together.
Yeah.
That would be my only negative on
Everybody's a critic, Billy.
This is an upset. This is our only upset of the day.
Violator came in at 167, and Deja Vu was at 220. And in the last round, we were actually in line with Rolling Stone. The Arctic Monkeys were 346, and Dr. Dre was 37. We move on, and who are we going to be putting against each other next time there, Billy?
Well, it's fun to watch you reach for the next word.
Yeah.
Corey's CPU just rebooted there for a second.
I'm sorry. I still have COVID brain.
He's like, sorry, I'm having a seizure over here.
You know, when they talk about the COVID fog, they're not wrong. There are moments I'm just like, what the fuck just happened here? I was thinking about something, and now it's gone.
Okay, so next time, if you want to get geared up for the next time, here's the albums you should go listen to. We have Tommy by The Who, which will be taking on Lord's Melodrama.
That's an interesting matchup.
That is a very interesting matchup. Wilco's Yankee Hotel Foxtrot will be up against Kendrick Lamar's To Pimp a Butterfly.
Wow.
Live Through This by Hole will be coming up against Joni Mitchell's Blue.
Oh my God.
And Intervisions from Stevie Wonder up against Southeastern by Jason Isbell.
Again, it's, there are times that, like, at least some of the albums have something in common, but these have been lopsided.
This is fucking weird, man. I must say, though, the further we go down this odd little rabbit hole that y'all decided on, because I really didn't know what the fuck you were talking about with this whole bracket bullshit. I was just like, okay, whatever. We'll talk about albums. Okay, cool, go. Hey, I get to spout my usual bullshit? Yeah, totally. Okay. It's like, it worked, so here we are. But yeah, it's fucking weird the further down we get on the albums. So I think we're going to see stranger matchups, though.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes. Yep.
Is it going to be Courtney Love against Dark Side of the Moon? Or Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young against Cyndi Lauper? Or something? I mean, who the fuck knows,
Well, we know what albums are coming. We just don't know who they're going up against.
Yeah, it'll be odd.
All right, folks. Well, thank you again. You could find us on the YouTubes.
Praise Satan.
Yep.
Au revoir.
Bye-bye. And push the button, Frank.
There's a twat on the horizon that's peeing in your mother's Coke. He doesn't know where his plastic things are, but he's not such a joke. No, he's the shoegaze cow. He pisses on your tongue. Yeah, there's spaghetti on the elevator, and no one can remember the next rusty thing out of my eyes. I will piss them in the ears of the gods. Piss them in the ears of the gods. I will piss in the ear of Jesus. Ear of Jesus. Piss. Piss. Oh, wait, they're back. Better stop talking about that. Don't want them to hear you say that. I won't talk about it anymore. I will not speak of that ever again because, my goodness, what I said while you were away is unspeakable.